Press the bell icon on YouTube and don't miss another update.
Namaste, and we welcome you to this broadcast which commemorates the 151st birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi. The great man was born on the 2nd October 1869, just 12 years after the first great war of independence. And he bore the marks of that great event as he grew up. He has detailed out his experiences in his autobiography, that My Experiments with Truth, which he wrote around about the 1920s. And most of what he has written is actually his formative years. We need to understand where he is coming from, whereas he came to India and he bore the garb of the common man. He went around Champaran, he went around Kheda, he cut his teeth through the satyagrahas. But this theory of satyagraha is actually not born from within the Indian experience. This is what he got from the Western experience, his Western experience, and the basic inspirations that he got were from three sources. That was from Tolstoy, Henry David Thoreau, and John Ruskin. And the satyagraha business is completely from Thoreau, the civil disobedience movement. All this he borrowed from Western sources. He, of course, reinterpreted Gita in his own manners, in his own way, and in his own image. But unfortunately, we have to question his understanding of the Gita, because he interpreted Gita in a somewhat pedantic way and in a somewhat pacifist way. Gita may be anything, but it is not a pacifist book. It is not a pacifist creed. It is a call to action. Gita is a call to action. It is a call to action to the pacifist. It is a call to action to the person who is not mindful of his energies, the person who is not mindful of his duties, the person who is not mindful of the challenges. So that is what Bhagavad Gita is. So we have to question Mahatma Gandhi when he talks about the Gita. Today, we celebrate him. He was given the title of Mahatma by none other than Rabindranath Tagore, himself a great man. So a great man recognizing and honoring a great man. Mahatma Gandhi purportedly followed the dictum, and this is an ancient Indian dictum, of doing what he preached. But now we have to also question certain things that he did. And let us do an examination, a general examination of the things that benefited India. The things that benefited India, so first thing that he did was that he did a mass mobilization, and a successful mass mobilization of the Indians, especially the poor Indians. Till the time he came, the Congress was busy doing what is called elitist petitioning to the British and acting more or less as an appendage of the British. After he came, Congress became a mass movement. So that was his achievement. But the mass movement that he brought about, he made certain mistakes which ultimately led to the partition of India. And that first mistake that he made, the biggest mistake that he made, was not being able to recognize and not being able to understand the Islamic way of life and what Islam came from. He thought that Islam and the practitioners of Islam, especially the clergy with whom he had struck up some kind of a bargain, were not the kind of innocence that he thought, and the kind of nationalism that he was bringing up was anathema to them. He completely failed to understand that, and in the process, by joining the Khilafat movement and by joining the non-cooperation movement of the Khilafat committee, he gave them a kind of legitimacy, not just to the entire Muslim class, but he gave a kind of legitimacy to the clergy, to the most regressive element among the Muslims. He gave them that legitimacy, which ultimately resulted in the partition of India. And also because he also had this intention of having a complete sway over the Congress. In fact, in January 1920, he went as far as to say that if you accept me as your leader, then you also have to accept me on my conditions. And it has to be some kind of a regimentation, then it has to be a dictatorship, and you have to follow my diktats. So that was what he said in January 1920. That is the height of the non-cooperation movement along with the Khilafat Committee. And that proved to be disastrous ultimately, because he got dished by the very friends in whom he had reposed the greatest faith, notably the Muslim clergy. And Muslim clergy, after ditching him, not only smelt blood, because they realized that Mr. Gandhi was a weak man, and Mr. Gandhi depended upon them to gain his own legitimacy within the Congress. That they sensed, and then they exploited it to the hilt right till the end. In every major confrontation, they were able to beat Mahatma Gandhi down by blackmailing him on this emotional pitch of Muslims being the oppressed party and Muslims being equal, the Muslims being separate. And every time that happened, he succumbed to them. That was not just his greatest failing, that was also totally contrary to what Bhagavad Gita preaches. Therefore, my first point in commemorating Mahatma Gandhi is that Mahatma Gandhi was definitely a great man, but the legacy that he bears is from Tolstoy, Thoreau, and John Ruskin, and not from Bhagavad Gita. So please do not call him a true practitioner of the Gita. He was not. That is one. The second point that I bring to bear is that his opposition to all other forms of resistance was again not in the Indian tradition, because Indian tradition validates all paths to truth. So if Swaraj was his truth, if independence was his goal, and he thought that Indians deserved to rule themselves, then it was quite wrong, according to me, for him to decry and despise the revolutionary methods that were espoused by a number of people. And it was also not quite right on his part when he decried the methods that Subhash Chandra Bose, another great man, advocated. That was point number two. And the greatest folly that he committed was that he almost went head over heels to appease Jinnah when Jinnah came into prominence. And even greater folly that he committed was to give prominence to Jawaharlal Nehru and also legitimize Jawaharlal Nehru as some kind of an intellectual, which he was not. Jawaharlal Nehru was only a pretender. And ultimately, in 1946, Jawaharlal Nehru had no support within the Congress Working Committee and within the PCCs. He could not have been elected as the president of the Indian National Congress. And it was known that anybody who became the president of Indian National Congress at that point, in June 1946, he would become the prime minister, the interim prime minister, and probably the next prime minister of the independent India. Having known that, for him to pitch for Nehru over Patel was, according to me, the greatest folly. And India paid very dearly for that. India paid very dearly with that. India paid very dearly with blood. India not just paid with partition, but India paid with blood of Hindus. Therefore, his role in privileging Muslims over Hindus is definitely quite questionable. Jawaharlal Nehru would never have become the Prime Minister of India had it not been because of Mahatma Gandhi. Let that be crystal clear. In the AICC meeting, in which nominations were being sought, the PCC members, the PCC presidents were the main voting bloc, and there were 15 of them at that point. And out of that 15, 12 were supporting Sardar Patel, 2 were supporting Acharya Kripalani, and 1, that is Maulana Azad, was supporting himself because he was the incumbent president, and he wanted to continue. Just imagine that the same president who was propped up actually by Mahatma Gandhi again in order to win over the Muslims, he lost the elections, the provincial elections and the Central Assembly elections on the question of Pakistan in the Muslim electorate so comprehensively that a bigger rout cannot be imagined. In the areas that now remain within India, Muslim League won 93% of the seats. And in the Central Assembly, it won 100% seats. 100% seats all over India. There were 30 Muslim seats, and all 30 Muslim seats were won by Muslim League. And Congress fielded its candidates in all those 30 seats, with Maulana Azad being the president. Maulana Azad, the great so-called liberal Muslim, could not win a single seat. And still, he wanted to continue as the president in 1946, and therefore he wanted to become the Prime Minister of the independent India. Just imagine the situation. There would have been two countries, India and Pakistan, and both headed by Muslims. So this is what the situation that Mahatma Gandhi had brought India to. His appeasement, his continuous bowing down before absurd demands of Muslim League, his never taking up a frontal challenge to Muslim League, acting scared all the time, appearing weak all the time, advising Hindus to die peacefully and be happy that they were being killed by their Muslim brothers. He said that so many times that he imbued a sense of complete cowardice and helplessness among the Hindus. Just see what Savarkar did. When in 1939 the Congress ministries resigned, it was the greatest folly according to me. They just left the space open for Muslim League, and Muslim League at that time was not really a force to reckon with. But by supporting the British, they became close to them. They managed to put Muslims into the army, into the British army. It was Savarkar who said, Hindus, please get into the British army. And you cannot fault Savarkar for that. After all, in the First World War, Mahatma Gandhi was doing precisely the same thing. He was helping the British recruit Indians. So if Savarkar did that in the Second World War, he actually helped the Hindus, because at the time of demobilization, 1945, after the demobilization, India still had 34% Muslims in the Indian army, and that became one of the main reasons for the partition. As Dr. Ambedkar says in his famous book, Pakistan or the Partition of India, that the Muslim League clearly refused. He said that the Muslims will not fight another Muslim power. If Afghanistan were to invade India, then the Muslims would not go and fight. And also that the Muslim League would have a veto on all the Muslims in the army, whether they would be allowed to fight another foreign power or not. In that kind of the situation they were claiming. And Congress was acquiescing all the time. In fact, in 1942, what happened? In 1942, we talk about the Quit India movement a lot. In 1942, what happened was, in 1942, Pattabhi Sitaramaiah, we know him as the close confidant of Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi got him to move a resolution in the CWC saying that all provinces will have the power to leave the union if they wanted. And that was in the wake of the Cripps proposal that were coming. Stafford Cripps had come in 1942, and he had brought certain proposals. And this was one of the proposals. This was actually adopted by the CWC, and there was a hue and cry all over India, and there was a hue and cry within the AICC. Chakravarti Rajgopalachari moved a counter resolution in the AICC, and in the AICC it was passed. And after that, three of them, the president, Abul Kalam Azad, Mahatma Gandhi, and Jawaharlal Nehru, all three of them said that it had no bearing on the CWC resolution. However, the criticism grew to such a crescendo that all three of them found ground slipping from underneath their feet. Then they devised this strategy of the Quit India movement, which turned out to be the biggest flop in the history of all Congress movements. It was crushed within 6 days. Even the seventh day could not dawn. And it was definitely hypocritical doing this kind of a movement at a time when British were struggling and at the same time opposing Subhash Bose, who was saying that we should take help of the Axis powers to get the British out. So they were being opposed on principle that we should not stab the British in the back. But here you go for Quit India movement because Savarkar was criticizing very badly, and Savarkar was incinerating the Congress on the CWC resolution that they had passed, that the provinces should have the power to secede. And Quit India movement was not on that point. The Quit India movement was on the point that Stafford Cripps was saying that the defense of India would be in the British hands. I mean, just look at the fig leaf and just look at the lame excuse on which this Quit India movement was fashioned. It was really a sorry state of affairs. Between 1940 and 1947, all the moves that Mahatma Gandhi made, they were not just flops, they were also completely to the interest of United India, and he played right into the hands of Jinnah. I mean, right after Quit India movement and right after saying that, okay, the Muslim is a bully, and then he retracted and then he went and stayed with Jinnah. So all these moves have bred a kind of, I should say, a weak and cowardly spirit among the Hindus. And if the Hindus had not militarized between 1939 and 43, then I can guarantee you that the whole of Punjab and the whole of Bengal would have gone to the Muslims. That would have been the situation. It was Hindu Mahasabha which fought for the division of Punjab and which fought for the division of Bengal. And Hindu Mahasabha was actually supported by Sardar Patel. Sardar Patel and Hindu Mahasabha acted in concert in securing the division of Punjab and Bengal when it became quite clear that the way Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru had acted, the partition had become almost inevitable. Because after the Direct Action Day in 1946, they completely caved in. They lost nerve. They completely lost nerve. The Congress at no point demonstrated any intent of resisting the Muslim League. They were so scared of civil war. I mean, there's one thing of not fighting a civil war or not wanting to fight civil war. But if you're not prepared for a civil war, then the other person knows that he can blackmail you by threatening civil war. And that's what happened. They threatened civil war. They demonstrated Action Day on 16th August 1946, and you simply caved in. Then what happened after the independence? What happened to the Hindus in West Punjab? What happened to Hindus in East Bengal? Those are such gory tales that they need not be retold. They do not need any retelling. So I must say that while Mahatma Gandhi was a great man, while he was able to mobilize all the masses of India, but he was able to mobilize only the Hindu masses. The Muslim masses he chose to mobilize through a discredited clergy whom he gave legitimacy to. He legitimized them, and that discredited clergy actually then benefited out of that and mobilized the Muslim masses in a way in which they went outside the purview of United India. And not only that, when Dr. Ambedkar was pleading for a full population exchange, at that time, Mahatma Gandhi, by going on fasts and again blackmailing only the Hindus, all his fasts actually blackmailed the Hindus. They never had any effect on the Muslims. After all, when India was getting divided, this is another chapter, that on 14th June 1947, the CWC meeting finally adopted the Mountbatten proposal in which India was to be divided. And the AICC was no mood to accept it. But it was the behind the door persuasion of Mahatma Gandhi, because of which AICC very reluctantly went along with the CWC acceptance of the Mountbatten plan. So these are facts. So these facts should be considered, and Gandhiji should be given his proper place. But if you say that Gandhiji was the father of the nation, well, this nation is a civilizational nation in about at least 20,000 years old. So if you say that somebody is the father of the nation, then you actually say that the nation came into being only in 1947. Sorry, I am not prepared to accept that. This is an old civilization. This is a civilizational nation. This is not an ethnic or a religious nation. This is a civilizational nation going back more than 20,000 years. So please consider that, and accordingly, when you lay wreaths on Mahatma Gandhi's Samadhi, please do remember that he was a great man, but with warts. Thank you. Jai Hind. Vande Mataram.